6 weeks ago, the month of March, the federal government spent 8 times more money than it took in. It collected $128 billion in the month of March and spent $1.1 trillion. The S&P, as we may be aware, of course, one of the largest rating agencies in the world, a couple of weeks back, downgraded the United States from stable to negative. This is a major event. I think this has happened perhaps maybe 2 times in the last couple of 100 years in the United States. The next step will be a downgrade of the actual ratings itself. This is a major warning sign. According to technical indicators, the dollar is on the verge of collapse. I think the all-time low for the dollar on the dollar index was about 71. It has been on the dollar index in the past month, trading at 72 to 74, closing today a little over 73. So we're very close to that, testing that low from, I think it was 2008 when it had hit that 71 level. So the dollar continues its fall, this time falling to a record low against the Australian dollar and touching its lowest level in 16 months against the euro, and continues its decline against almost all major currencies. We have gas at over $4 a gallon, probably heading to $6 a gallon, perhaps towards the end of the summer, certainly by the fall. And if the dollar continues to slide, we're going to pay more and more and more at the gas pump. Oil at about 110 a barrel. And there's a gentleman named Richard Russell from Dow Theory Letters. He's been publishing his newsletter, I think, since the 50s. And I've got a piece here, if I can find it, just to read it to you briefly. He says the U.S. dollar collapse will accelerate. He says the U.S. dollar will continue to drop and hurt the economy and ultimately lead to a default through inflation. Now, he also says the great gold tsunami lies ahead. He basically says there's obviously an inevitable panic taking place that's going to push gold and precious metals much, much, much higher than you see them at today. He says the panic to buy gold will override anything else. It will be one of the greatest financial phenomena that most of today's investors will ever see. He said the great gold tsunami actually lies ahead and says it will be historic. He also comments on the Dow hitting, I think, and Dr. Elliott will elaborate on this later, I think he says, for technical reasons, ultimately as low as 900. And again, this gentleman's well respected, has nailed it most of the time since before probably a lot of us were born, or some of us at least here. So, okay, comments from Richard Russell. John Williams, shadowstats.com. Is another resource we need to look towards, and he says the collapse is unfolding right now at an alarming rate. And I'll close out my talking points with an important message from John Williams. Okay, so a couple of other quick sound bites. You can pick this up on the Oath Keeper's site, has the full article. World Bank President says we are one shock away from crisis. Of course, Bretton Woods II took place recently in New Hampshire. The meeting, of course, was titled something like the New Global Monetary and Financial System. We've got China no longer moving into the dollar, in fact, moving away. Japan has completely collapsed. The global community is moving away from the dollar. And last time we had a conference, I believe there was one, maybe 2 states that had passed in their House legislature to use both gold and silver as legal tender. Well, now we have, I believe it's 4 states moving officially in that direction, and about a dozen other states ready to follow suit. Bill Gross from PIMCO has dumped all Treasury and all U.S. bonds. This is a major, major issue. Warren Buffett alerting to move away from all corporate bonds 5 years and longer. And so connecting the dots on the true state of the economy and telling the truth about the lies, let's summarize a couple of quick points before we get to solutions for the escalating crisis. One of the things is inflation. Inflation is soaring. America's day of economic reckoning is now here, and we need to prepare for the coming financial storm. So, inflation is soaring. The Fed is printing money at Weimar Germany rates and holding interest rates at artificial lows near zero. Both are guaranteed to crater the U.S. dollar and end its reserve currency status. So again, this isn't happening by accident. It is happening by design over a long period of time. Their intention is to destroy the dollar and bring America down. You can research this through history by going back and looking at New World Order advocates such as Henry Kissinger, George Bush Sr., David Rockefeller, and today George Soros. Okay, second issue facing us right now is the U.S. dollar is in a free fall and collapsing. The whole world seems to be aware that the U.S. is printing dollars like there's no tomorrow. We talked about PIMCO, largest bond manager dumping. Central banks, hedge funds, large dollar holders all over the world are also reducing their U.S. Treasury holdings, and that exodus could turn at some point into a flood. And the moment it does, the dollar will begin to collapse immediately and hyperinflation will set in. We've been talking about this for years, but it is now imminent. We are at the tipping point. I'll connect the dots on this in just a moment as well. C, America's government debt disaster. In other words, the disaster for the government position right now financially, it's here, front and center. It's a complete nightmare. Bill Gross, and I quote Bill Gross, he says, PIMCO has been selling treasuries because they have little value within the context of a $75 trillion total debt burden. And the municipal bond crisis continues to deepen. Muni bonds in the U.S. total $2.9 trillion in the municipal bond market. They're continuing to collapse, dropping 11% in the past 5 months. Now, a lot of people don't see this when they get their statement. Of course, the brokers aren't alerting them to it. But go try and liquidate your position. Some you might be ahead. Some you might have a little bit of a loss. Some significant. Some are illiquid. You can't get your money. But overall, it's dropped 11% in the past, 5 months. So MBIA, which is the only surviving bond insurer among the 3 major bond insurers, it itself has been downgraded by 3 notches to B-, which is deep into junk territory. And of course, some time ago, Warren Buffett got out of the bond reinsuring business altogether. And so we are facing an economic crisis that we've never seen since the Great Depression, and this will probably be much worse because it's an inflationary depression. Most Americans have very little, if any, real understanding about this crisis and are not prepared. And so we have to ask ourselves, if the collapse came tomorrow, what are our vulnerabilities, and start plugging these in and getting them corrected. And before I lead to a couple of the aspects of pillar number 2, preserve wealth, I want to also cover the fact that the QE2 story, let's just go back a little bit and move it forward to where I see this thing heading. Quantitative easing 2, printing money and monetizing debt. I believe it was about $1.1 trillion that was approved and brought into the system, or at least $1.1 trillion approved last quarter of 2010. They've spent that $600 billion of that already. The next $500 billion they're about to monetize the debt with. It's already approved. That's what's going to happen perhaps in the next 30 days or so. Now, on I think it's May 16th, the vote takes place on raising the debt ceiling. And it's my understanding we've come up with maybe $30 or $60 billion so far to reduce the budget deficit. And so we're still in the $1.5 trillion level and range of a shortfall this year, and here it is already May. And so it's my belief that they will raise the debt ceiling, and this will be your QE3, our QE4 and 5 to carry us through just 2011. So the dollar collapse is imminent. from all the money that's already been injected into the system. This is going to be accelerated as this new money makes its way into the system. Now, this is a potential way this could play out, and this is just my opinion. But we could have, as the dollar falls and has some sudden jolts and collapses, and many things can trigger that overnight. China dumping an excessive amount, the global community dumping an excessive amount, losing our official rating from AAA. In fact, Martin Weiss from the Weiss Research Group out of Palm Beach and Jupiter, Florida, sent a report out last week stating our status is actually C- or C+, I can't recall, if you looked at it truthfully. So it's heading into the junk level. But the rating agencies still have it up at the AAA. But that would be another trigger event. And there's other things that can trigger an overnight collapse. And so also Bill Gross had commented a while back that if we continue on this path of spending, taxing, and borrowing, which we are, he forecast that we would have to revalue our currency, an official government revalue of the currency, perhaps in the last quarter of this year, 2011. And so this is my hypothetical scenario of how this might play out. And we're probably talking about over this year and into the beginning of next year. We're talking about the dollar collapsing, gas at $6, and then up from there. All essentials such as food and clothing to skyrocket, and $6 a gallon, and oil significantly higher than where it is today. We cannot survive that in this economy right now. The average working American will not be able to get past $6 a gallon and the skyrocket in food. And so we begin the acceleration of the dollar. We reach a point of superinflation, and then we begin the beginning stages of hyperinflation. And so while this is happening, we're in our hyperinflation over the next couple of years, taking America economically to its knees. The IMF steps in with the SDRs, or special drawing rights, to act as the world's Federal Reserve System, or the replacing of the dollar as the world reserve currency, while America is falling to pieces. At some point, they decide in this global governance structure to create a regional currency, which would be the United States, Canada, Mexico, and I would further extend South America into the mix. When you take a look at what the Bush family has done down there, purchasing 200,000 acres, and all the money Obama has given to Brazil to explore for oil down there, and all the things that are happening, I would say there'll be a regional currency encompassing the Americas. And then perhaps 3, 4, 5 years down the road, they'll have, if they're successful in this, have reached the position where they can now issue the global currency, and the Bancor, B-A-N-C-O-R, is the proposed currency, taken, I think, from Keynes, and they've minted a coin, and they've talked about it at the IMF in a report of last year. So this is a potential way it may play out. It's John's crystal ball. I do know for certain superinflation and hyperinflation is drawing near, and that's what we need to prepare for. So I'd like to close out on the bad news by reading a report from John Williams, and then touch on the 4 pillars, solutions for this, and then turn it over to Dr. Elliott to talk about the economy as well. And then we'll bring Stuart Rhodes on, who will talk about some of the programs that Oath Keepers are launching right now, Operation Sleeping Giant, and some extremely important things that we can do to prepare, protect ourselves, our community, and perhaps our state. So, the United States, this is John Williams, shadowstats.com, a report March 15th. And by the way, about 2 weeks ago, he sent an alert that said that this report, which I'm about to summarize, hasn't changed, and in fact, the crisis is worsening and accelerating. And he stated, and I'll be brief, maybe 60, 90 seconds of a paraphrase here. He says, the United States economic and systemic solvency crisis of the past 4 years only have been precursors to the coming great collapse, a hyperinflationary Great Depression. Now he says, such will encompass a complete collapse in the purchasing power of the United States dollar, a collapse in the normal stream of U.S. commercial and economic activity, a collapse in the U.S. financial system as we know it, and a likely realignment of the U.S. political environment. And he says the
pay the high oil prices from the Middle East. We're now forced to pay higher food prices because we are burning our food for fuel. And this is ridiculous. And food prices are popping up across the country. A pound of sliced bacon costs $4.54 today versus $3.59 2 years ago, and $3.16 a decade ago. See, so you saw a decade ago $3.16 up to 2 years ago $3.59. That's just moderate price inflation, and then it jumped to $4.54 in just a matter of a couple of years. See, inflation is starting to accelerate, and I could go on and on and on. Item after item after item of these massive amounts of price inflation in food. You're seeing what's happening in gas, and John is right. Probably by the end of this summer, we are going to see $6 a gallon gasoline. That's prices that we can't hide. You know, you can hide food price inflation by keeping the size of the box the same, keeping the price the same, but decreasing the number of ounces of food that's in that box, like in a box of cereal. That's a trick that marketers play, and that's exactly what happens. If you go look at a box of Cheerios or Lucky Charms or something like that, it's not 15 ounces in that box anymore. It's like 12 or 12.2 or something like that. Go and look, but yet they've kept the price the same or even raised it just ever so slightly, but that's actually an increase in 15 to 20%. So as these commodity prices are going up, that is just a function of an increasing money supply. And as I started off this earlier, the money supply has increased. It's doubled. It has doubled in a couple of years. And that means that price inflation will ultimately mimic money supply growth as time goes on. So we're going to be pushing mid-double digits in inflation over the next year or two. How do I know? Because the money supply tells us that's the case. And how do you protect yourself against this? This conference call is about solutions. Well, the solution is invest in precious metals to protect your finances. Why? Because they are a hard, tangible asset. They will grow as the world economic situation deteriorates, as global geopolitical and political crises deteriorate. I mean, these are causing global imbalances all over the globe as inflation persists and as foodflation persists and as social chaos persists. And you see what's happening in Israel and Iraq right now, and Israel is amassing a lot of warplanes, a lot of ships, and it looks like they might be wanting to strike Iraq. Well, that is going to add more to the global tensions. Any kind of change, chaos, uncertainty, turbulence, turmoil, all of that causes gold and silver to go through the roof. We're seeing a lot of volatility in the metals markets right now. Look at what's happened to silver over the last 2 days, down almost 15%. And we have to ask ourselves, is that because of fundamental reasons? Absolutely not. Nothing that has caused the bull market in gold and silver over the last 8 years has changed. What did they do over the last week that caused silver to fall the last 2 days? The government changed margin requirements on futures contracts. They raised them 3 times in 1 week. Went up 9%, went up 10%, went up 12%. 3 separate instances where the margin requirements were increased. Well, what does that mean? It means for investors who are more risky investors who are investing in the commodities market on these huge margins, well, and trying to take advantage of that leverage, when they raise the margin requirements, they have to have a bunch of liquidity to meet those margin calls. If they don't, they have to sell off their assets because they don't have enough to meet those new margin requirements. And that's what's happened over the last couple of days, and why silver has come down about 15% in 2 days. Now, where is silver year to date? Even after that 15% correction, silver is still up 25% since the beginning of the year. Oh my word. Is that keeping up with inflation, or is that not keeping up with inflation? Yes, it's keeping up with inflation. Not only is it keeping up, it is it's giving us an opportunity to thrive, not just survive, even during this horrible economic condition that we're living in. So see, there are solutions out there. Look at gold. Gold is a safe haven investment as well. And as you see currencies and stock markets and all the turbulence happening around the globe, You know what? Gold is going up as well. These are the things that we can allocate into to not just survive, but thrive, even during the most horrible economic conditions that our country is seeing, as our beloved currency collapses. Wow. We can actually protect ourselves. And it doesn't matter what they're saying on CNN and on Fox News and on CNBC, because what we're doing is actually protecting and preserving and growing and making sure that we're not just keeping up with inflation, we're surpassing inflation, which is the only way your portfolio will survive in the long term. So that brings me to point B. A, you have to allocate it to the right asset class. B, you have to have the appropriate mix of paper to tangible assets. What is an appropriate mix? Well, as paper assets are deteriorating, as stocks are coming down because actually, I take that back. Stocks are not coming down right now. They are actually at lofty levels. They're but 12,800 on the Dow. Why though? Because of stimulus money. That's the only reason. You know, if you look at the fundamentals of the stock market, we are not in recovery. Unemployment is still sky high. The only reason why we even have any kind of spending in this government right now, or in this economy right now, is really because of people just getting by, buying their food and things of that nature, and the U.S. government injecting trillions of dollars into the economy, and that money is actually being spent by the big money center banks and being invested into the Dow. They're not lending it out to the consumer. They're afraid to lend it out to the consumer because interest rates are too low, and they're afraid that they're not going to get their money back. Can't say that I blame them. I can't say that I blame the big money center banks, the Chase Manhattans, the Bank of Americas, the Citibanks, the Wells Fargos. I mean, you name it. Can you blame them for not wanting to lend money out to the consumer in this environment when people are losing jobs hand over fist? I cannot blame them. But what are they doing with all these trillions of dollars? They're just investing it into the Dow, which is why the Dow is hovering at over 12,800, even in the midst of major economic decline, where revenues are coming down, where taxes are going up. We're at the point in time now where interest rates are going to have to go up. Why? Because the U.S. consumer isn't footing the bill anymore for the $14 trillion debt that we have. We're not spending enough to actually pay for our $14 trillion debt. So we have to rely on foreign investment coming in. When foreign investment isn't coming in anymore enough to foot that bill, it doesn't mean that the debts go away. The debts are still there. So then what happens? Well, the Federal Reserve has to print money out of thin air to fund our own debt crisis. That's called monetizing the debt. And that is the beginning stages of what John talked about, hyperinflation. Good grief, we're right there. We're standing on the edge of this cliff, ready to not jump off, ready to just fall off. And so paper assets are diminishing and going down to nothing, and therefore we have to protect ourselves. We have to hedge. And when we do that with precious metals, that's what gives you that balance. And so what is an appropriate mix? At minimum, you need to have a 1-to-1 hedge of precious metals to your paper assets. That 1-to-1 hedge will give you the peace of mind to sleep at night, knowing that when your paper assets are coming down, at least your metals are growing and you're offsetting that. That is a hedge. However, if you allocate bigger into this huge growing market where gold and silver have been growing on average over 30% a year like clockwork. Silver last year was up 83%, and like I already said, up 25% this year, even after a huge correction. Just 3 days ago, silver was up 40% year to date. These are fast-growing assets. Why? Because there's a lot of demand for it. There's little supply and a lot of demand. And so there's ways to buy gold and silver. And that's point C that I want to go over is we've talked about an appropriate asset mix at minimum 50%, but I would actually allocate about 2/3 to 75% of your portfolio into precious metals because you don't need that much cash when cash is deteriorating. We've talked about the whys. We've talked about the appropriate mix. Now is the how. How do you invest into precious metals? Where you're going to get coins, gold and silver coins. And I would look at it as a bucket approach. Look at it as 3 different buckets. You take physical possession of your metals. If you have it in storage, someplace like a COMEX depository in Delaware, I would highly recommend you start taking it. If you have the physical capability to store it at home, I would take physical possession of it now, because to me it's always safer to have it on you than stored someplace else. The same thing for assets that you may have in an IRA. I would recommend, and there's a lot of different reasons why I would consider taking money out of your IRA, paying the taxes on it, even paying a penalty if you're not 59.5, because there's legislation risk, potentially. As the government runs out of money, and they might do what they did in Argentina, and that is force allocation into U.S. treasuries to create demand for a sinking dollar. Boy. Now, so what can be done? Take money out of your IRAs, invest into precious metals. How do you invest into precious metals? Look at the 3-bucket approach. Silver. In silver, I would go into pre-1965 dimes and quarters. Go into your junk silver. That's the cheapest way to buy silver, and it's a great barter item as well. That's going to go up and down dollar for dollar with the silver market. In gold, you have 2/3 now left for gold. 1/3 I would put into European fractional gold. 1/3 I would put into U.S. semi-numismatics. So, the U.S. semi-numismatics are at incredibly low premiums right now. Why? Because we're in the midst of a huge bull market, but their premiums are low. That doesn't make sense, Kirk. Tell me why. Well, the U.S. consumer is asleep at the wheel. They are believing the disinformation and the fibs and the outright lies on CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, and even on Fox News that say that we're in a recovery. As soon as the U.S. consumer wakes up, you're going to see those premiums skyrocket and thus act as leverage on your account at some point down the road. We don't know when that point is going to be. It might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be a year down the road, but at some point it will happen. And just in the last few days, we're starting to see that happen. Gold is actually down $30 or $40 in the last couple of days. Down $30 or $40, and U.S. semi-numismatic coins went up $100. Okay, so what does that tell us? The demand is starting to increase. Those premiums are starting to spread. And European fractional gold, your French francs, your British sovereigns, your Dutch guilders. By fractional, I mean they're not a full ounce. They're just 1/4 of an ounce, 1/5 of an ounce, something like that. That is going to act as a great hedge against a collapsing currency. It's not going to ever really have premium expansion. It's going to go up and down dollar for dollar. Now, you don't need an awful lot of money. You don't need an awful lot of money when you want to invest in gold and silver. See, silver is only $42 an ounce. You can buy small amounts and just start allocating into these markets as time goes on. Just keep adding. You know, a lot of us don't have any disposable income. We don't have any extra income. You know what? We've got to try to find ways where we can cut back on something, whether it's TV, whether it's having a huge garage sale, whether it's selling things that we might not need, or just, you know, maybe eating out less once a month or twice a month, or not seeing a movie, or cutting your satellite service. There's ways that we can find, all of us, to try to allocate, even if it's just $50 a month and adding 1 silver eagle, or if it takes you 2 months to get that, start allocating. Or start rolling over your IRAs. You might have hundreds of thousands of dollars in your IRAs at risk in the paper asset classes, and you can actually allocate that into physical precious metals. Most people don't realize that, but you can. And so, you know, look at the market fundamentals again. Why did gold and silver come down over the last couple of days in the midst of a huge bull market? Not for fundamental reasons. I wouldn't even call that a correction. It was because the commodities exchange, basically, people changed the margin requirements. They changed the margin requirements. Last week, they went up 9%, 10%, and 12% on 3 separate instances and changed people's margin requirements, which means when they're buying that at huge, basically leverage type positions, If they can't make those margin calls because they don't have the liquidity outside of that, they have to dump their assets and that's going to cause the price to come down temporarily and ever so temporarily as supply all of a sudden has outstripped demand. So boy, buy gold, buy silver, and buy it now. See, it is still so incredibly cheap. We still have a good 5 to 8 years left in this market as I'm looking at it, because the U.S. consumer is just starting to get involved. And we've been in a bull market for the last until the last 8 or 9 years. Since 2002, we've been in a bull market, and the U.S. consumer is just starting to get involved. And those markets are up 400% and 700% respectively in gold and silver. And the U.S. consumer isn't even involved yet. See, this is a global bull market. Now that the U.S. consumer is starting to get involved, tells us how early on still we are in these markets. I don't think that silver peaks out until we get to $150 an ounce. Gold probably peaks out at $5,000 an ounce plus. Get in, get in, get in. General rule of thumb, get in as soon as you can. General rule of thumb in a bull market, and get out as soon as you can in a bear market. We're not even close to a bear market. There is a lot of growth left in these markets, and we need to take advantage of them. It's the only way, in my opinion, that we can preserve and protect, with your investment assets. John brought up some other good ideas. Food, yeah, water. As food inflation soars, you need to protect yourself, protect and preserve. That is the name of the game right now. I know that I'm sounding serious, and a lot of this stuff is imminent, a lot of it is not imminent. There are things happening legislatively and in this country that we cannot control in the short term. In the medium and long term, yeah, we can vote these clowns out of office. We can hopefully change policy, but you know what? We might change policy, but I don't think we will have a currency anymore. The dollar, we might still have a dollar, but it's not going to be the world's reserve currency, and that means life as we know it will change overnight. We're just going to be the likes of the Italys and the Frances and all the other countries that aren't the reserve currency. When they print without discretion, their currency erodes and goes to nothing, and they could hit hyperinflation. The only reason there is still demand for our currency right now is because we're still the world's reserve currency, and all international settlements are traded in the U.S. dollar. That's the only reason there's demand for the dollar right now. And so when that gets taken away, the rug is pulled out from underneath it, gold and silver will absolutely go through the roof. How will we know when this market is over? When everybody's getting into it. When you're seeing the chart go parabolic and go through the ceiling, you are going to know that we're basically at the end of it. And that's when either best case scenario, we sell off our gold and silver, roll them into the next undervalued asset class. If we're completely wrong and the currency doesn't collapse, and this is just a trend like any other, we're just going to lock in huge profits and roll them into the next undervalued asset class. But let's say that we're not wrong. Let's say that we're right in what we're talking about here, and the U.S. dollar slips away, slides into oblivion, becomes a memory instead of reality. And we're going to need this gold and silver to barter with and to survive on. Either way, whether it's a best case scenario or worst case scenario, everything is pointing towards gold and silver right now. And boy, I just want to encourage you to take advantage of this heavily moving market, this growth in gold and silver, because you need to protect and preserve. Look, things are bad, things are getting worse, and in my opinion, this is all just physical manifestations of a spiritual battle taking place. Whether it's the economic and social collapse, whether it's the economic collapse, whether it's the geopolitical tensions around the globe. And I don't know how many of you listen to Dr. Jim Dobson on the radio. I'm going to be speaking on his radio program on May 12th. He invited me to speak on there and talk about these things, talk about the global economic, spiritual kind of dimensions, because our political, economic, and religious freedoms are all tied together. You lose one, you lose them all. You lose them all. And so we need to get on our hands and knees. We need to pray for wisdom. We need to get direction from God on how to navigate this horrible economic minefield that we're living in. Boy, these are tough times, and so we need guidance from the Creator of the universe, We need to give extravagantly. We need to change our lifestyles. We need to be faithful and obedient to God's word if we plan on surviving this. And that's what I want to leave you all with tonight. I know that we talked about a lot of gloom and doom already, John and I, and Stuart's probably going to talk about the same thing, because this is not a good environment that we're living in. But you know what? Doesn't mean that we have to have our heads in the sand and live in fear, because there are things that we can do to protect and preserve and actually grow our portfolios. And God did not give us a spirit of fear. He did not. And so there are things that we can do to protect and preserve, and that's where the hope is. We just have to be brave. We have to have courage. We have to do the right thing in the face of opposition and make sure that we protect and preserve everything that God has given us. So when our time on earth here is done, we hear the words, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. With you I am well pleased." Wow, what a calling that we all have to make our voice heard and do the right thing. And that's what I want to leave you with tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirk Elliott, and you can visit with Kirk at kirkelliottphd.com. You can also call my office anytime, and I can connect you up with Kirk as well. I'd like to introduce now the founder of the Oath Keepers, Yale University graduate lawyer Stuart Rhodes, patriot, and a brave man that's got a lot of very important information to share with us tonight on what's going on in the world and some of the initiatives of the Oath Keepers and some of the places that Stuart is heading very soon. So I'll turn it over to you now, Stuart. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine, Stuart. Your screen is frozen, but I hear you.
Can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you now, and I can hear you. Everything's perfect. It's all yours.
All right, good to go. What I want to focus on is solutions in particular. And what I want people to think about is to think about what the founders intended us to have. We are supposed to be a sovereign people, self-sufficient and sovereign on our own land. Their ideal was the human farmer who owned his own land, and the family worked the farm, and they were sovereign and self-sufficient. And within a county government that otherwise left them alone unless they were hurting their neighbors, and then from there it went up to the state level. And the state government, even the state, let alone the feds, wouldn't intrude on your land or affect your daily life unless you're doing something such as selling your produce across the state or otherwise impacting a state level. And that was their ideal. And then, of course, reserving all powers not granted to the federal government in the Constitution, reserving everything else to the states and to the people. And so we're supposed to have that system of a pyramid where most of the strength is at the bottom. And when I talk about that, I don't mean just economic strength. That's certainly part of it, but also military and your food. The power is supposed to be at the bottom, not at the top. And what's happened is the political elites have managed to flip it on its head. We now have a republic instead of a republic made of the federal government having a very small amount of power at the very tip of the pyramid, and the states having the lion's share of power, and of course the people themselves having almost all the power in their own hands. What we now have is the exact opposite. We have an upside down pyramid with very little power down at the individual level, in the community level, or at the state level, and all the power gathered to the federal government. And that includes our money, that includes our food, that includes our military strength as well. And so what I want to talk about is looking at each one of the four major points in our new initiative called Operation Sleeping Giant. And the purpose of this initiative, Operation Sleeping Giant, you can go to our website, www.operationsleepinggiant.com or .org. And the whole point of this new effort is to wake up veterans. Most folks know that Oath Keepers has been focusing on getting the current serving military and police and firefighters to refuse unconstitutional orders. And our biggest concern has long been what would happen during a crisis, such as look at Katrina. During Katrina, you had house-to-house gun confiscation under the pretext of it being necessary because it's an emergency. And this kind of mindset has now infiltrated all American culture, where they think that if there's an emergency that's serious enough, then they can just scrap the Constitution or suspend it or set it aside during the emergency. And that's exactly the opposite of what the founders intended. They wrote the Bill of Rights for emergencies, for crisis. For example, the Second Amendment. It's supposed to be us, the people, bearing arms as the militia, that is the security of a free state during an emergency. Dr. Ibn Vieira has been harping on this for years. It's the only time in the Constitution where the term necessary is used. It's necessary for the security of a free state. You won't be free and you won't be secure without it. But what we've done is we've allowed, through our mass media and through the ignorance, the intentional ignorance of our schools and being dumbed down, we've gone to this absurd idea that during an emergency, the people should not be armed. They should be disarmed, and then the government is the only one that has weapons. That's precisely the opposite of what the founders intended. And so that's part of that flipping of the paradigm from the founders' design. And so what do we do? So what we're worried about now most is, of course, trying to get the current Syrian military and police to refuse to go along with future Katrina-type gun confiscation, or refuse to go along with martial law, which is absolutely unconstitutional. Nowhere in our Constitution does it say anything about martial law, about the supposed ability of the government to suspend the Constitution. It's an absurdity. It doesn't exist. So what we're worried about, though, is that certainly while we want the current Syrian military and police to understand where the lines are in the Constitution, understand how illegitimate martial law is, or how illegitimate suspension of the Constitution is, and violation of our rights, we want them to do that, but we also need us as a people, and especially us veterans, must take responsibility for the other side of the coin, and that is the stronger we are in our communities, the stronger we are as individuals, as neighborhoods, as towns, counties, and states. If we're strong enough, then the pretext won't be there for suspending the Constitution and martial law. If Louisiana, I'm getting feedback. Can you guys hear me okay? John,
it seems okay now, Stuart. It seems fine. Go ahead.
Okay. My point is, if Louisiana, or even just New Orleans, had been really squared away, that would have taken away the pretext of bringing in, federalized police officers around the country who are not under the control of the people. They're not the sheriff that they elected. They're not even his deputies. He has no say over what these federal officers do. There'd be no pretext for bringing in National Guard units from around the country, or even worse, bringing in the 82nd Airborne Standing Army troops. And so they were there in Katrina. And so if you take away the pretext, now you're much more likely to get the military and police to do what's right and not go along with any justified suspension of the Constitution, or an attempt to make a crisis. What's the old saying that they use? Don't let a crisis go to waste. Well, if we remove the pretext, it's much less likely they'll be able to capitalize on crisis. And as John and Kirk already talked about earlier, that is what the elites have planned. They have weakened us to the point where, when the dollar collapses, we'll be so weak and so desperate that we'll accept what they have already planned for us next. And as John mentioned earlier, what that is, it is a worldwide version of the Fed. They'll say, the Federal Reserve, the problem with that is that nation states and central banks of nation states are now outdated. This is a globalized economy. We need a global currency and a global bank. And so that's what they're going to do. The IMF chairman has already stated publicly they plan to use the special drawing rights from the IMF as an interim currency. That's how he termed it. An interim currency on the way to an official global currency. Probably a basket of currencies with the yuan as the preeminent currency. Who knows what it would be? But whatever it's going to be, that's their plans, is to create a world currency, and you will wind up with the IMF and the World Bank merging into a worldwide version of the Federal Reserve. They've already told us this. George Soros has come out on video openly advocating for this. At the recent G20 meeting, this is what they were talking about. This is what's coming. And so we need to understand that their plan is to capitalize on our weakness and then bring in a super Fed around the world, and with that will be what they call global governance. We all know what that means. And so how do you stop that? Well, the way to stop it is to resurrect the institutions the founders intended us to have as a sovereign people. We got to start with ourselves as individuals, but not just doing the standard prepper gray man thing where you prep and you hide your supplies, you don't tell your neighbors about it. That's not going to preserve our liberty. You might make it through the crash, but then what? You come out on the other end of the crash. Don't think you're going to come out and just rebuild from the rubble. That's not what's going to happen. They already have the next foundation ready to lay on top of your head of the next level of tyranny. And so what we have to do right now is step outside of the paradigm of the fiat system, decouple from it. The rest of the world's already decoupling from the dollar anyway. We need to decouple and get away from it and get back to our constitutional system. And the way we do that is to focus on, I think, 4 critical areas. First is food. Food, fuel, emergency medical, communications, those essentials of life. And you start with food first because it's the one thing you really can't improvise. It's very, very difficult to improvise food. Start right now, growing a garden, storing food, anything you can. I think one of the better ways to start is to follow the advice of the Mormons. You go on their site, providentliving.org, and they give really good basic guidance on starting food storage. And what they advocate is you store up 3 months supply of the things you use all the time. The boxed and canned and bagged goods that you always use as a matter of course. You store that stuff up, and then you also build, while you're doing that 3 month supply of ordinary foods, you also build up your very cheap, easy to find, easy to store basics like beans and rice and wheat and powdered milk and things like that. And you can go and use the Mormon canneries here in Montana. I took a bunch of folks who aren't even Mormons down to the Mormon cannery in Missoula, and they canned a bunch of food storage, dry goods. And the Mormon canneries there let us know that, look, we're more than welcome to go there. You don't have to be LDS to do it. So I recommend you go and find the Mormon cannery in the town where you live or the nearest major city that has one, and call them up and talk to them, schedule an appointment, go down there. You can buy bulk dry goods from them, 50-pound bags of rice for $15, 50-pound bags of wheat for like $7.50. You can just buy really cheap food, and you can use their canning system. So start with food, the hardest thing to improvise. It used to be in this country we had 3 years of strategic grain reserves stored up during the Cold War. There was enough grain in the United States to feed the people for 3 years. Now it's been reduced to almost nothing. Now there's only enough to feed every man, woman, and child in the U.S. a half a loaf of bread. It's just ridiculous. So it's like a hierarchy of needs. You've got to eat. You've got to have clean water. Water purification's got to come next. You've got to have shelter. You got to be able to stay warm. What do you do when the power goes out? Even in an ice storm, or even in the aftermath of a tornado, like we just saw in the South, what do you do when the power's out? How do you keep warm? So make sure you have very basic, back to basics ways of preserving your life, securing and preserving your life, as John calls it. So focus on food first, emergency medical, all those things. And when you do this, don't just do it as an individual. Do it as a family. Do it as a. I see someone mentioned that your church policy is to have an LDS rep go with you. I think it's fine, but the Missoula Cannery, they don't mind if folks go down there. They just call them up. I've sent plenty of folks, and I've not gone with them. I'm a member of the church, but I have not gone with them, and they're able to go in there and buy bulk foods. So contact the cannery and see what they say to do. So, but my main point is that, look, don't just do this as an individual or a family. Do it as a community. Start getting your churches. If all churches did the same thing that the Mormon churches did, we'd be set. And if all VFW halls also did the same thing, if they all had a standard that, look, you will store up a year's worth of food if you're able to do it, if that's your benchmark and your standard across all of our social structures and social institutions, we'd be set. We wouldn't be worried about the desperate situation and martial law and people clamoring for the FEMA card that will come as a new currency. We wouldn't have to worry about that if every American followed the same guidelines as the Church of LDS does, the Latter-day Saints. There used to be a time in this country where people were self-sufficient. They grew their own food. Our grandparents got through the Great Depression in part because they knew how to grow their own food. My grandpa went down to the river and fished. That's how he ate and made it through the Great Depression. We got to get back to that same mindset of sufficiency and resilience. But don't just do it as individuals, do it as a community as well. And you can work in the private sphere through all your different associations, especially your veterans and your VFW Hall, your American Legion Hall, Marine Corps League, all of those. Encourage the membership in that hall to start forming mutual aid associations and start prepping, getting ready. As a veterans hall, do it as a group. You already got a built-in connection there. You already got a built-in structure. Put it to use. Don't just get together and have beers and talk about the old days or talk about politics. It's not just about politics. Get together and make sure you're squared away on the essentials of life, including communication and including emergency medical, all those things that are necessary, and start storing extra food. Even just rice and beans. If you just had bags of rice and beans stored up in your VFW hall and you were able to take care of each other and your community, you'd be in a much stronger position. And that has nothing to do with government. So you can do that all as a private institution through private associations, churches, veterans organizations, forming a neighborhood watch and starting mutual aid that way as well. Okay, but then also work in your government. Go to your town council, go to your county commissioners, and prod them and poke them and say, look, we want you to square away this county with a grain reserve. Why not? What's it going to hurt to do this? A food bank, a grain reserve at the county level or the town level. Prod them, but don't put all your eggs in that one basket because they might fall through. Right now we have a real problem in this country with corruption down at the very local level, and you should be certainly trying to kick all the bums out and clean out the corruption. But if you're not able to do that in the public sphere before it's too late, before the collapse comes, if you're also working in the private sphere, two pillars at the same time, then you're still going to be good to go because you'll be able to fill in the gaps as a community, whether it's a neighborhood watch, whether it's your veterans organizations, whether it's your churches. You can provide the structure for the community that the politicos won't. Now, if you get good people in there, say you elect a guy like Sheriff Mack as your sheriff, and you've got squared away constitutionalists and your county commissioners, then you're solid. Then you can do a lot of things that you can't do as a private individual. For example, you can start a sheriff's posse, an official sheriff's posse made up of volunteers. All the veterans in the town get together in the county and say, look, Sheriff, we're here if you need us. We're ready to go. We'll self-supply. Don't ask for money, because right now towns and counties are starving for money. They're running out of money. So be committed to self-supplying and self-funding. And all you really need, of course, is just your basic supplies you'll need while you're on duty. And you can do that yourself. So step up to the sheriff and say, Sheriff, we've got all these veterans here in the local VFW hall who are committed, and we'll be your posse if you need us. And encourage him or her to establish that ahead of time. And there are now sheriff's posses popping up around the country. There's one right here in the Flathead live. And so I've seen it in other parts of the country as well, like down in Arizona. In response to the border troubles, there are people who are calling up and forming posses. Sheriffs are stepping up and doing the job. So your sheriff, encourage your sheriff to do that. Give them a copy of Sheriff Mack's book, wake them up, get them realizing what the necessity of a sheriff's posse, and make that a litmus test for them for the next election. If they will not institute a sheriff's posse of volunteers from the local community, especially from veterans, then kick them out. Okay? So that's the law enforcement side. The other part of security is the militia side, which is the military power. It's supposed to be in the hands of the people. We now have what's left of our militia, the National Guard, which is not really even a real militia. They are now mostly just a federalized auxiliary to the standing army. They are for the most part deployed overseas, leaving a vacuum here at home. And what the government has done, the federal government has filled that vacuum by saying, well, FEMA will step in and NORTHCOM will step in. So now you have a Northern Command. Standing Army troops in the 1st Combat Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division are now are now deployed here at home. This is their area of operations, as though they were in a foreign country. So that's what they've done, is they've taken the National Guard, they've sent them overseas, and they filled that vacuum with standing Army troops. So what we have to do is say, okay, we're going to, in our states, revitalize the concept of a people's militia. And it should be done first at the county level, and then work your way up. And all of these things start with your neighborhood, with you and your family and your neighbors, and your churches, your social institutions, and keep going up as you go to your town, to your county, and then hopefully to your state. Hopefully we have enough time so that you can revitalize the militia as a statewide institution that's actually capable of repelling invasions, as the Constitution talks about. It should be strong enough to do that, to repel invasions, to suppress insurrections, and to execute the laws of the Union. That's what the militia is supposed to be able to do. And the reason why the founders wanted the people to be the power, the military power, for all internal security and emergency relief. They wanted us to be our own guardians, because that way we couldn't be oppressed. They understood that that was the answer to that ancient question of who shall guard the guardians. Their answer was, if we're our own guardians and our own militia, then there's no chance of us being used to oppress ourselves. But when you have a very weak people who don't form together, they don't train, they're not prepared, they're not skilled at arms, and they're not supplied with enough weaponry to repel an invasion, when you have that kind of weakness, then you have a professional standing army that could be used against the American people. So we have to revitalize the concept of militia, start in your counties first. But while you're doing that, that's the public institution of a county militia. But while you're doing that, once again, is you want to have a private institution of a neighborhood watch, two pillars. One's the militia, that's public. The other one's the neighborhood watch, which is a private association of you and your neighbors. So even in the worst case scenario where you have local corrupt politicians who will not establish a militia, if you have already formed the neighborhood watch and you've already got a pool of veterans who are willing to serve as an ad hoc posse for the sheriff in case they're needed, then and you've already put together your communication system from neighborhood watch to neighborhood watch, or from VFW hall to VFW hall, etc. If you already have that in place, then you can fill in the gap. It's not the best solution. The best solution would be to have your county establish an official militia, and then have your state establish an official militia, state militia, of all the different county militias together under the governor. That's the ideal. Okay? Then you have sovereign immunity, then you are the state, and you're pitting one sovereign against another. Now you've got the state in the strongest position possible to say no to federal edicts, to stand up. And that brings me to that important plank also, state sovereignty. Focus on your states, strengthening your states in every facet, and getting yourself strong, dedicated, patriotic constitutionalists in the state legislature and your governor's office who understand the concept of reserve powers of the states. They understand the 10th Amendment, and who will stand up and say, we are not going to let you, the federal government, abuse the citizens. We're not going to let you confiscate their gold. We're not going to let you confiscate their food, or any of these things that might be done, that have been done in the past. The gold confiscation in the 1920s and 30s. So we need to make sure that we have state legislators who will stand up and interpose themselves and say, we're going to enforce the 10th Amendment line of separation of the sovereignty of the states, the reserve power of the states and the people, against intrusion of the federal government across its lines of reserve powers. It only has few and defined powers under our Constitution, and it's up to our states to enforce those limits, just as Madison and Jefferson called for in the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. I encourage folks to go read that. That's the answer. The answer to people worry about, what about when they outlaw gold, or they come to confiscate food, things like that. The answer is your state should be committed to stepping in between you and the federal government. It's up to the states to resist. And that's where I put all your focus. Your political focus should be mostly on your state legislatures and your governor's office, making sure you've got squared away folks there, making sure you got squared away sheriffs who will stand up and defend your rights. And then back them up with sheriff's posses, with county militias, with being self-sufficient. So, and of course, we also have fiscal policy and economic independence. Same thing. That's why working with altmarket.com, his name is Brandon Smith. He writes under the pen name Giordano Bruno, but he started a new organization called alt-market.com. It's the Alternate Market Project. I encourage folks to go look there. The whole point of that is to teach people how to use barter, how to set up barter communities, how to become much more self-sufficient economically. Including within that is the concept of growing your own food, supporting your local farmers, your local food co-ops, shopping locally, building a strong economic hub within your local community so that when there's a collapse and you have to decouple and be self-sufficient, that you can do it in your small community, just like they did on a frontier town. You had your doctor, you had your blacksmith, you had your dry goods salesman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You had your farmers. So focus on strengthening your local community as much as you possibly can to be self-sufficient so that when the economy collapses, you and your neighbors can keep going and keep helping each other. Because if you're all by yourself, you don't have the skills. One good term I like to use is one that Kevin Reeves of On Point Tactical uses. He says, look, training trumps gear. All the gear in the world is not going to help you if you don't have training. And he teaches people how to do wilderness survival and prepping. But community trumps even gear and training. You can't possibly have all the skills you need to be totally self-sufficient. It's very difficult to do. You're not a doctor, for example. What are you going to do if someone, is seriously injured on your farm? Even if you're self-sufficient, if someone's got a serious infection and they're injured and they're dying of an infection, what are you going to do? So it's better to have a strong community. It's great to be prepped. It's great to have gear. It's great to have training. But even more important than that is community. It's kind of like a Special Forces A-team. You've got an expert in different fields who all work together. They cross-train like crazy. Of course, cross-training as much as you possibly can. But you also have people who are true experts in each field who can be there, like the medic, for example, a critical person to have in your neighborhood. A doctor or a trauma doctor or a trauma medic is someone who's going to be critical. So look at it like that. Look at it like the way to roll is to establish strong communities. And the whole point of this is that this is how you say no. This is how you just say no to what they have planned for us next. If we're in strong, resilient communities, we can say no. And in strong, resilient states in particular, we can preserve state sovereignty and from that preserve national sovereignty against its final destruction. The final destruction of the republic can only come if two things happen. One, the military and police go along with it. But the second thing that is required is your apathy. If you just sit on your butt and bitch and moan, or just worry about only buying gold and silver and don't get out there and get squared away, or even if you just prep all on your own but don't care about your neighbors and you forget about your town and just forsake them, then you will be the one lone person in your neighborhood who's got preps and is squared away. How's that going to help you? And how's it going to help your children? How's it going to keep them free? To preserve the republic, we must preserve the institutions the founders intended us to have as a sovereign people. Strong, sovereign states, strong, sovereign counties, strong towns, and then strong individuals and families and neighborhoods. We've got to get squared away. So I encourage folks to go to OperationSleepingGiant.com, check that out. There's several different articles there to talk about what we advocate people do, and we're only scratching the surface.
Well, thank you, Stuart Rhodes. Fantastic information from Stuart Rhodes, oathkeepers.org, and Dr. Kirk Elliott, PhD.com. We've got a lot of questions we're going to run through in the next 40 some odd minutes. I want to make a quick announcement. The Save America Foundation hosted and sponsored the Save America Convention in Tampa just last month, and the entire event was filmed, and we had Stuart Rhodes and Sheriff Mack and Tom Tancredo and Gary Johnson and Dr. Elliott, G. Edward Griffin, and 25 local, state, and national leaders on a 2.5-day convention. It's been professionally filmed, it's in edit, and this will be released next week. So stay tuned for the announcements. We'll send them out and get your copy. It is loaded with valuable information, resources, and action items like we're touching on here with Kirk, myself, and Stuart. jychambers@msn.com is my email address if you want to communicate with me. Okay, so we're going to randomly go through some of these questions that were asked a while back, and I'll come to the ones that were asked recently as well, so we cover all the different topics of interest. This is a question starting off with precious metals. Why has metals pulled back, specifically silver, in the last couple of weeks? What is the probable cause?
The probable cause that's actually the cause is the change of margin requirements on the futures exchanges. Whenever you raise those margin requirements, it means people have to meet the margin calls, and if they don't have the liquidity to do it, they need to sell their assets. So this is just a very temporary blip. It's giving us a huge buying opportunity.
Okay, thanks. Let's take another question. Same question, sort of. Okay. where on earth are we going to sell this gold, silver, and copper when everyone is going broke and doesn't have anything to exchange it with? So maybe speak about the various ways, Kirk, that metals can be used, including that specific part of the question.
You know, there's so many ways, exit strategies out of metals. Best case scenario, we're going to sell into strength. We will make the recommendation that you sell when the premiums are sky high. If it looks like the market's going to correct itself, if we're getting back into a strong economy and so forth. Just like selling a house 3 or 4 years ago, when demand is high, you would have had a bidding war on your property and gotten a high dollar amount for it. Now you try to sell a house, there's no demand, you're going to have to lower the price 30 to 40%, and it's still going to be for sale for a year. So as an investment, we're going to sell it when premiums are high, and that's when everybody's buying it. Worst case scenario, you're using your small fractional silver coins especially for barter. You're using your small gold coins for barter. Large gold coins, 1 ounce pieces, semi-numismatic gold, is not good for barter unless it's a really big ticket item. So your junk silver, your pre-65 dimes and quarters, you're going to exchange them back and forth to merchants and so forth just to survive.
There's a lot of questions about the websites that we've all mentioned, and I'll repeat them, but I'll make it easy. If you go to assetpreservationinstitute.org, which is in the center of your screen, all of the websites we've referred to are there, listed on my site, API site. Stuart referred to alt-market.com. That was a question folks had. And so hopefully that helps. Again, you can always send me an email, but everything's on API site, all of these sites. Let's see, there's some questions here. Yes, Stuart?
John, I wanted to say one thing about the question about where do you use the gold and silver. If Brandon were here, he wasn't able to make this teleconference from Alt Market Project. I think what he would say is, look, silver and gold are your way of preserving what wealth you do have for the other side of the crash. It's not so much you use them during the crash as much as you use them on the other side. The priority should be food. It should be barter goods that people need. In Argentina, when their economy crashed, there were massive barter networks that were set up, and they traded goods and services. That they were so desperate and poor, no one had any money, and so they just traded things they had around the house they didn't need anymore. That's how they got the things they needed. So it would be nice if everyone had some silver and gold in their pockets, but if you're facing a situation where no one else has silver and gold and they're desperately poor, then look at your silver and gold as just a way to preserve what wealth you have for the other side when there is a new economy set up, when you get past the barter stage. And I believe that's what Brandon would say.
Okay, thanks. There's a question for Stuart. How is the Oath Keepers progressing? Are you getting penetration of your ideas anywhere more successfully than other areas? Where are your setbacks occurring?
We are definitely making an impact staying in the active duty military, and we know this because we're having, like Bill Clinton openly condemn us in his speeches this last year, and so that to us is a good sign. And so when you're over the targets, we get a lot of flack. And we've gotten word back from people within the government that the powers that be are, quote unquote, concerned about the Oath Keeper effect, as they call it. And the problem is they can't quantify it, which is really great. They don't know how big it is. It's like an iceberg. So there's a visible tip of Oath Keepers who are official members. You have about 11,000 of them. Quite a few of them are current serving. But they can look and quantify that, but they don't know how many are beneath the surface that they can't quantify. And so we're kind of getting inside their heads and making them worry about whether their orders be followed. And the whole point of that is to buy you more time. It's not the solution. It's part of the puzzle. And if you just sit, like I said earlier, if you just sit on your butt and don't do anything else, you can't just rely on that being what saves us. We have to revitalize our republic from the bottom up.
Thank you. Another question, Stuart. Are you familiar with any canneries, Mormon canneries here in Florida?
No, I'm not. I'm not there in Florida. So the best thing to do is start at publicliving.org. Or go talk to your local church, go talk to the bishop of your local church, and they'll set you up.
Craig, somebody asked a question earlier about should I get out of the 401k and IRA? And I'll tackle that question very quickly. 6 risks facing the IRA and 401k: stock risk, bond risk, currency risk, inflation risk, legislation. As Dr. Elliott mentioned, it's only in committee, but it's 1,100 pages. They're drafting it for a reason. And that legislation, if enacted, could basically do a forced allocation out of wherever you are into treasuries and then annuitize it over your life expectancy. And there's more to it than that. But that's the 5th risk. And you can, it's easier in the IRA. You can just roll it over into a gold and silver IRA and get out of the paper, eliminate 4 out of those 5 risks in one fell swoop. He should be in the right asset class, outpacing inflation. The only problem is it's still in the IRA. So the only way to solve that, as Kirk mentioned earlier, is to cash the IRA out. But, obviously you'll pay taxes, and if you're under 59.5, you'll pay a penalty. But we have to weigh out the pros and cons of this, and we go over this in more detail in our rescue and maximization strategies. We don't have time to delve into completely right now. Now, one last piece. I said there was 6 risks. The other risk is if you've done that and you've eliminated 4 out of the 5 risks, but you're still in the IRA, not only do you have the legislation risk, but you also have a potential bullion confiscation at risk because the IRS requires you to only purchase bullion inside the IRA, and as we know, FDR through executive order way back when confiscated gold bullion. So there is a way to solve that in the complete rescue and maximization, and that's just, again, cashing it out, paying the taxes next year when they're due in April, investing it in non-reportable, non-confiscatable gold and silver, and that's, I guess, an answer to the... Now, the 401k is a little tricky, more tricky if you're still employed. You might be able to take a loan from it. If you've left that employer, then yes, you can typically roll it to an IRA or cash it out. But there's a lot of particulars on the 401k rules. These are things we can help you with. Our website has some information about that. Let's take some other questions. What would be considered the most constitutional state when it comes to keeping the feds out of their business?
Well, I live in Montana because I chose Montana as what I thought was the strongest state for those purposes. Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, any of the Rocky Mountain states. Utah's doing pretty good too. Right now they've got their sound money bill, which is passing the legislation, and they're already beginning the process of returning the sound money and decoupling from the fiat system. And so any of those Rocky Mountain states are pretty strong. But we've seen good things out of Oklahoma and Texas as well. Many states are reasserting their sovereignty. But I picked Montana for many reasons. One of them was political, but that was not the only consideration.
Thank you. Question possibly for Kirk. How do you get into a gold IRA? I mentioned it to my accountant, and he has no clue.
It's actually very simple. It's just like any other IRA. So you can do a transfer, you can do a rollover. If you've already got an IRA, you just transfer it over to a new IRA. It's a different administrator, one that actually has the capability to store physical metals for you in a safety deposit box at a Fort Knox type of a facility. Now, if you're just starting up a brand new IRA, just as easy. You just fill out an application, takes 5 to 10 minutes to fill out, and you can contribute up to $5,000 or $6,000 a year, depending on your age. But the key here is physical metals. They will be stored for you in a box. So you're going to be doing coins or bars. It's not a gold or silver ETF. That's still a paper asset. That's a proxy for the physical metal. What we need is the physical metal. So it will be gold or silver stored for you. Very easy to do. It's just a matter of filling out the paperwork, which takes 5 to 10 minutes, and get that transfer process working.
Thank you, Kirk. Stuart, question here says, we cannot have state sovereignty if we continue to take and make deals with the United States government. So how do we stop taking all money from the Fed?
Well, that's correct. It'd be hypocritical to assert that you're standing on your reserve powers as a state while you're also taking massive federal funds. and so we're going to have to wean ourselves from the federal teat. So it's necessary. So along with supporting legislators who will stand up, preserving your sovereignty, preserving your independence, you need to decouple, and you need to stop taking the federal money. And it might be rough for a while. A lot of folks have gotten so used to it, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's kind of like being a welfare mom. When you're dependent like that, you can't be independent and be dependent. And so we will have to, and as a matter of principle also, we will have to decouple and stop receiving federal funds. And the way to do that is to have a governor and a legislature that just says no. Says keep your money, and potentially says, hey, and we're not going to send you the hard-earned money of the people of this state either. We're going to, until you stop doing unconstitutional things, we're going to withhold our taxes. And you can do that, potentially do that as a state, not just as individuals, but all of you in the entire state doing it together.
Thank you, Stuart. Question here for Kirk. What qualifies a non-reportable, non-confiscatable gold? And I guess the opposite, you might as well answer as well.
Yeah, non-confiscatable is a function of price. If you take the spot price of the metal, whether it's gold, silver, it doesn't matter. Spot price is the price you see on TV. It's basically current futures month contract price. For example, gold being $1,535 today, let's say. Well, if it's more than 15% higher than that, it's going to be classified as a semi-numismatic and therefore be dealer non-reportable, non-confiscatable. Anything below that fence line, so less than 15%, 15% greater than spot price, is classified as a bullion type coin or bar, and therefore it is going to be confiscatable and reportable and dealer reportable under current U.S. law. Now, dealer reportable just means that we as dealers do not have to report it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't report it. You should always report any capital gains or anything that you have, because that's an IRS regulation. You have to pay your taxes. And so you need to report any kind of gains that you have. But dealer non-reportability specifically is on the dealer's end, where if it's semi-numismatic, they do not have to report it, so it remains the ultimate in privacy.
Thank you. Stuart, someone's mentioning that the Oath Keepers used to have a newspaper that was very popular, and is interested to know if you may be publishing that in the future.
Well, it wasn't popular enough. There were not enough subscriptions to sustain it. What we're going to do is do a quarterly, and so we'll have a quarterly paper. It is important to have something you can hand out to, for example, to active duty military without to worry about coming on a website and being tracked. There are concerns like that, and so a newspaper is certainly a good thing to have. But what we'll do is a quarterly paper instead of a monthly. And I also agree with the gentleman, Joe Olson just wrote in and said confiscatable under unconstitutional law, the law an oath keeper would not obey. That's correct. And like I said earlier, that's why you have to have strong counties with strong sheriffs and strong states that will help to stand up and resist confiscation.
Stuart, is there an Oath Keepers group in Missouri? This came up at our Tea Party last night.
Yeah, we have a forum that has members in every state. I don't think we have official leadership there yet, but you're certainly welcome to help us do that. Help us start a state chapter. You can go on our site and you can join the forum in that state for free, the Missouri Forum, and then help us build.
Thank you. Is it true that any bank transactions in excess of $10,000 is automatically reported to the IRS by the bank? Kirk?
The bank can report it. They have the ability and the right to do so. However, logistically, it's a huge time constraint. It's a huge paper bottleneck. And the bank presidents that I know don't usually do that unless it's a very suspicious activity. Somebody wanting to do an international bank wire, they're all sweaty, there's no eye contact, they're just acting real shady. I mean, they'll actually report something less than $10,000 on a person like that. However, on normal transactions, there's so many transactions over $10,000, people buying cars, buying houses, buying boats, buying this, buying that, buying jewelry. that it's nearly impossible to do that, and they don't unless they suspect some kind of suspicious activity.
Alrighty, thanks. When do we know when the time is to get out of gold and silver?
As a general rule of thumb, when everybody's getting into it, when the people on CNN, CNBC, Fox News, your friends, family, coworkers, you name it, when everybody's getting in, that means we need to put our little antennas up and be ready to get out, because we want to sell at a time of high premium, not when there's no demand. That's why when I talked about earlier, kind of equate it to the housing market. You try to sell a house now when there is no demand, you're going to have to lower the price. It's going to be for sale for a while. It almost becomes illiquid. But selling into strength, that is the goal. And that's assuming that we sell it. You know, if you ultimately have to use it for barter for some reason, you don't care. You're just going to trade it back and forth. But like what Stuart said, and I agree with Brandon, the best thing to do would keep this so you have something to rebuild with on the flip side of this, and so we can rebuild our society and rebuild our great nation. You're going to need food and all kinds of other supplies to barter with and that. So hopefully we'll just keep this and grow and grow and grow and have our portfolio values thrive over time.
Thank you. I'm going to take this next question. It says, we currently live on interest generated from tax-free munis. We get this question a lot. If you convert to the 75-25 tangible to paper ratios, how do we continue to survive at our current level? We can't eat gold or silver, nor can we pay our bills with it. It's a paradigm shift. It's a different thought process, something we're not used to here, and it's a great question. I'll tackle it briefly. First, get out of munis. We can send you all the reports on them. A bad place to be, and Kurt can comment on that. But what we do is we create in a crisis, keep it simple, Sam. So we create a simple income bucket approach. You'll be outpacing inflation now with the appreciation in metals. If you're relying on those munis for your month-to-month needs, we create a two-bucket approach. So 75% would perhaps be in the tangible metals, growing at over 40% per year on average, 25% perhaps in cash equivalents, and certainly, as we mentioned before, the food, the guns, the ammunition, repairs and things that need to be fixed, some cash at home. But for the income question, all you'll do is just sell off each year the amount you need from the metals appreciation, which are growing significantly higher than those munis are triggering, and so you will still have an income stream. You'll liquidate the metals; they're totally liquid. Gets wired right into whatever currency we're in. For now, it's the U.S. dollar. That's what we function in. So if you need, $30,000 a year in muni income, you can take it monthly or you can take it annually. So, and at the end of the day, you actually keep outpacing inflation in the 75-25, whereas now you're not, and you're carrying all that risk. So it's really that simple. As far as the question about, well, we can't eat gold and silver and we can't pay our bills with it. Well, no, we don't need to right now, because we still have food and we still have a currency that's valid and viable. Unless you're in those 4 states that passed gold and silver's legal tender, you couldn't buy goods and services with it anyway. But as you fast forward into this crisis, and as it starts to play out, you'll spend more and more of your money, and those munis won't cover it, or really any paper asset. And this is where the gold helps us there as well, because again, we're outpacing inflation. We liquidate off what we need, replenish that U.S. dollar to buy the same goods and services we used to be able to get without having to do that 6 months prior. And so that's one way it plays out. As far as food goes, if we end up when we end up in a full-blown hyperinflation and the currency is no longer valid and viable or being used, as Stuart and Kirk mentioned, and Brandon Smith is not with us today, you barter with it. You barter with it. And, a pail of junk silver, when it's worth 150 to 300 an ounce, might feed your family for a year. So, good question. Hopefully I've covered it. Let's take some other questions. Sorry, multitasking here. Okay, well, this question came up. You mentioned some names. Go ahead, Stuart.
I was going to add to what you said a minute ago, that's the whole point of Brandon's effort, the alternate market project, is to start using gold and silver again. And you don't have to wait for your state legislature to get its act together. You can start doing it in your local community as individuals with local businesses. Start getting the habit. Pressure your local grocery store. Go to them and say, look, we've got a list here of folks who have signed this petition. We say they will shop at this store. They won't shop at Walmart anymore. They'll shop at your store, Mr. Local Grocer, if you will start taking silver. And that's how you start to do that. You can do it even outside of government.
Stuart, there's a question here you mentioned earlier in your talking points about 3 pillars or 3 buckets. What was the third bucket?
Well, we have 4 major planks of Operation Sleeping Giant. First one is food security and other essential supplies, medical, commo. And commo would be preferably something like ham radio or wireless communication that is not dependent on the grid. And so things like that are number 1. Second one down is physical security. That's your neighborhood watches, your mutual aid associations, your sheriff's posse, and also your revitalized county militia. Those are your physical security to preserve your life against aggression. And the third plank is economic security. And the fourth one is state sovereignty and only voting for constitutionalists in their offices. So those are the 4 major planks.
Thank you.
And folks can go to they go to oathkeepers.org. I was going to say they can go to oathkeepers.org for more information on that.
Yeah. All right, oathkeepers.org. Kirk, a question about who do you sell the tangible gold to when it goes up? In other words, when it's time to liquidate positions, who buys the stuff?
2 options. You can either sell it back to a dealer, and they'll just buy it back at whatever the prices are on the day that you're selling it. Not all dealers are created equal. Some dealers will charge a commission on the back end. Some, there's very few that don't. So you just kind of let the buyer beware. Be careful, very careful on who you deal with, because you could get taken for a ride. So you just have to be very careful. For example, our firm does not charge a commission on the back end. That is a huge deal. If you're going to pay, let's say 2 to 4% commission when somebody sells something at the end, if gold is $5,000 an ounce and you bought it at $1,500, well, man, that's triple the amount at least, making the 4% on the back end the equivalent to paying another 12% up front. I mean, so just kind of let the buyer beware. Now, outside of selling it to a dealer, you could barter with it. Trade it with the farmer down the road for some vegetables, or a rancher for a side of beef, or whatever. So you've got a barter opportunity, or you could sell it back to a dealer.
On the gold and silver story, just visit the website you see in the middle of the screen, assetpreservationinstitute.org. There's dozens and dozens of points there, due diligence checklist before you buy from a metals firm, and it's the cornerstone of what Asset Preservation Institute does, is the education and the consultation. So I encourage you to go to the site. There's about 100 YouTube interviews I've done with a variety of experts, and there'll be quite a few more posted from the Save America convention soon. There's a question here for Stuart about the, it's there, it's scrolled away from me. While one moment. The question spoke to the reluctance of sheriffs. If you mention the word militia, they kind of run for the hills. How can we approach a sheriff here? It is, well, local law enforcement is very much against even mentioning militia. Why has just the mentioning of militia almost immediately turned off the high echelons, etc.?
Well, what's happened is that the mainstream media has demonized the term militia to make it the equivalent of, tinfoil hat wearing crackpot or potential terrorist. And they've been very successful at that. I mean, the militia movement of the 90s made some serious errors, and I understand their motivation, What they did, though, is they came out and said, look, we are here to stop another Ruby Ridge or Waco from happening. They put themselves directly in a posture of being opposite to the police and the military as potential military foes. And so I think in some ways they made it easy to demonize them. And I don't fault them for their anger over what happened in Waco. I was angry too. And so that's just kind of how it went. But because they just went the private militia route and got together as private groups, and they put themselves in that posture of being in direct opposition to local law enforcement, that soured their potential relationships with local law enforcement. I mean, the Second Amendment is our last option. Certainly, your last defense of your liberty is your right to bear arms. But the best way to look at it is not so much to be there, you as a private individual, to grab your rifle and fight back in a desperate guerrilla warfare thing against your own government. The way to look at the militia is it fills the vacuum. A militia should be the military strength of a state and of the entire United States when it comes to domestic use, propelling invasions, suppressing insurrections. It requires some pretty serious force to do these things. If you had a real state militia as an official government body made up of all the able-bodied citizenry in the state, then you would be filling that vacuum. That's far more important than saying, well, we're going to be there to fight the standing army. There shouldn't even be a standing army. It should be minuscule because you fill the vacuum. So that's our perspective, is we can correct this by saying, look, we're only talking about public institutions. We go to the county commissioners and say, we want you to establish an official government county militia, staffed by volunteers. But just like a volunteer fire department is under county ordinance and established by a county government, but staffed by volunteers, that's how we advocate doing this. So we don't use the term militia in a purely private context. We refer to neighborhood watches, mutual aid associations there. We refer to militia only in the terms of a public institution at the county level or the state level by county ordinance, by state statute. And I think that's the best way to approach law enforcement and say, look, we're going to be here as a pool for the posse, or to establish a militia as a government institution, not just private.
Thanks. I think this is a question perhaps for all three of us to tackle. What happens to Social Security in this situation? Will the Social Security be there? How is that going to play out?
I think at some point you're going to have some austerity measures, as the government needs to control their debt. They need to reduce the budget. In a hyperinflation, you're not going to have any foreign capital inflows coming in, so the obvious result is you have to cut spending. And if you're being paid in inflated or hyperinflated dollars, they are not going to go up with the hyperinflation and the cost of everything else. And so your Social Security may still be there. It may go away, but if it's there in this type of a scenario, it's going to almost be meaningless. You are not going to keep up with the potentially thousands of % of inflation per year or even more. So it almost becomes worthless. That's where the paper currencies, which Social Security is, that needs to be basically exchanged for something that does have value, a tangible asset.
I think that we're watching the fundamental transformation of America as promised, and if we thought the New Deal was a big deal, this newest deal is going to be a raw deal. I think they're consolidating everything. There'll be 6, 7, 8 banks left. They'll own and control much of, if they have their way, much of our free markets. They've taken over the health care. And this IRA confiscation bill, they're going to collapse the currency. They're going to transform all of this stuff. In fact, some of that IRA confiscation bill talks about if you have too much money, all kinds of formulas based on your age and what your Social Security is and how much of an IRA you own, if you're getting pensions from other companies. Well, then the formulas still apply in terms of annuitizing it over your life expectancy, giving you a payment, but they'll skim off X% from you because you have too much, and it gets redistributed in the system for everyone else. So I think they'll socialize, nationalize, or whatever word you want to use, the entire system and overhaul all that. I mean, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, it's all going to be transformed if they continue to move in the direction that they're moving in. There's a question here, Stuart. Do you think we will see a major uprising after the report of bin Laden's death?
Oh, does he mean in the Middle East?
It just says an uprising. I guess it doesn't indicate perhaps in the U.S. or overseas.
Right. No, I don't think so. I don't see that happening. But I mean, who knows? But no, I think the uprisings in the Middle East that recently occurred were due to people not being able to feed themselves, and so that was the main driver, not any kind of ideological perspective. And so no, I don't think so. I think we're going to see, if any more uprisings happen, it'll be because of those concerns of not being able to feed themselves.
There was a question earlier about this deliberate bank crash that was supposed to happen on May 1st. This was what Glenn Beck reported on his show and on The Blaze from the tape they procured of an SEIU member speaking about everyone all the union members doing a run on the banks by not paying their mortgages and credit card payments on May 1st, and thank goodness that came and went. It was a threat. I mean, there was a video of it, but apparently they never pulled it off, thank goodness. I want to take this question and perhaps turn it over as well to Stuart and Kirk, but the question is, we mentioned the word crash several times. What do you see as a group as the best and worst case scenarios as to the timetable? And I'll take that first. I think the best case scenario, and let's define crash, we'll talk about the dollar falling off a cliff, inflation at 100% in the hyperinflation situation, social unrest, these types of things. If we want to define that as the crash, I'm going to say it could happen literally at any day, but I'm going to say probably in stages in 2012. I think towards the next 3 to 6 months, we have an economic jolt that is going to be considerable. And I think all the other elements that follow will be living this way in the beginning of 2012. That's my view.
I would agree, John. I think using your definition there of a crash, I think we will see, as the dollar continues to lose value, potential reserve currency status taken away, the social unrest, the civil unrest, the economic collapse. I see it happening as early as 2012, but no later than 2015. But the end result is, I think that there will be a crash. No currency has ever lasted throughout the history of the world, and I don't think that we are any different. So the end result is going to be a collapse, a crash, somewhere between 2012 and 2015. That's my analysis of the situation.
I think the best, it's hard to say, no one has a crystal ball. What we have heard coming out of people within the military and within police is that the federal government is preparing for an economic collapse. They know it's coming, and they're preparing for it. They're training, they're storing away goods, they're just getting geared up for it, but they're just not telling the American people. And so that's what we've heard from within the government. And as far as the severity of it, who knows? It might be a situation like Argentina or Weimar Germany, where they revalue the currency and people just, those things are wiped out, but there's not, it's not like a Mega Man or 28 days later, or it could be as bad as Zimbabwe, or it could be, serious social disruption or even civil wars. Who knows what could happen in this country? So I think the best indicator is that the government's getting ready for it, and their focus appears to be on crowd control and controlling the cities and controlling people. And they're not so much preparing to help feed people as much as preparing to control them. And my suspicion is that this is being done because in many ways they want the people to be desperate, and then they'll be able to usher in the next stage. And so I think the best way to respond to this is presume the worst. Presume you only have 6 months a year at the outside to prepare yourself and your local community, be as strong as you possibly can, and focus on the hierarchy of needs: food first, security second, economic security third, and state sovereignty as your final plank. But work on all of those things as best you can at the same time, if you possibly can. But make food your priority. That way you can at least feed yourself and you won't be desperate.
Thanks, Stuart. If the dollar index is a good indicator, what's a number to really get concerned about? Can you put the dollar index into perspective, Kirk, and nail down some of those figures?
Sure. Right now it's 73. We're down 38% in the last few years. If we get to 58 on the dollar index, that's Zimbabwe-style hyperinflation. That's only another 25% drop from where we are right now. So, look into the mid and upper 50s as absolute chaos, mayhem, blood in the streets type of a scenario, and it's only another 25% drop from here.
How high will silver go, Kirk? You mentioned it before.
Yeah, how high? Sky's the limit, really. But I think a reasonable number would be 150, just a conservative estimate based on gold to silver ratios and where we are so far in this market.
Yeah. I think the National Inflation Association had it at the highest level I've seen. They said potentially 500, but I think being conservative, most folks are saying 150 to 300. No one knows. Okay, we can take a couple more questions, maybe one more.
John,
sure.
Hey, John, on the price of silver, isn't it the case that the price of silver is really going to depend upon how much the dollar is devalued? If it goes the way of Weimar Germany, it could be it could be absurd. It could be $1,000 or $10,000 for a silver ounce. But all that means is that the dollar's been destroyed. Isn't that correct, Kirk?
Yeah, absolutely correct. I mean, it could be $1 trillion an ounce in a hyperinflation. However, just kind of business as usual numbers that we can kind of relate to. I would say 150, but that's outside of a hyperinflation. Hyperinflation, all bets are off. I mean, you could see trillions and trillions of dollars as a price per ounce on silver if the dollar completely goes away and you have Zimbabwe-style hyperinflation.
I think the theme of our nationwide conference tonight has been protect, preserve, prepare for the damage that's here, the damage that's coming. And I think there's been a lot of great strategies and resources provided. Let's get a closing comment from Kirk first, and then Stuart Rhodes, and then I'll take us out. Kirk?
Yeah, my closing comment would be this. Make sure that you have your life in order. Make sure you have your spiritual life in order, your financial life in order. Make sure that you have a group, a community around you of like-minded people, because when push comes to shove, we're going to need people to rely on, and we're going to need a support system. And then if we don't have any funds available after this is all said and done, you're not going to be able to rebuild very easily. So everything ties together. Your finances, your financial freedom, your economic freedom, your personal freedom, your religious freedom, all of that ties together. And so we have to look at it more as a whole as opposed to just each individual piece, and make sure that you get your lives in order, because this window of opportunity is closing pretty quick for us to act.
Thank you, Kirk. Stuart Rhodes, are any closing comments for our friends and patriots listening and viewing?
Yes, we are in this predicament because we, the people, have abdicated our responsibilities. And especially you veterans out there, I'm talking straight to you. All of us who swore that oath have abdicated our responsibilities and allowed our country to deteriorate the position where we're in now, where we're no longer strong as a people and the sovereign states. And we have an out-of-control federal government. So it's up to us to right that wrong. And this is like constitutional triage. Focus on the most essential things first. Start from the bottom up. Start in your local communities and build from the bottom up and build strong sovereign states. The head is rotten, as Sheriff Mack likes to always say. Washington, D.C. is almost hopeless. You only have a couple of people in Washington, D.C. who still obey their oaths, and frankly, they both have the same last name. So you're going to have to do it from the state level and as individuals and communities. So get off the couch, get to your VFW halls. We focus on veterans for a very good reason. They are a built-in supply of people who have leadership experience, who have trained, have prepared in their training for worst-case scenarios, who are able to rationalize and understand the need to prepare. I don't have to sell them on it. All I got to do is wake them up. And once they realize what's going on, they're a very easy audience to get moving. And so that's where my focus is, looking to the most good. And so I encourage everyone out there to go wake up your veterans. Get them to OperationSleepingGiant.com, and we'll have more details there on COMO, on recommended food supplies. All of the things we're going to be talking about will be on the website as a resource.
Excellent, thank you. And a couple of important announcements, also addressing some of these questions. This entire session from the very beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern till 9 p.m. Eastern now has been recorded, and we'll make this available to everyone. I don't know if we've captured your email addresses, but if you would like a copy of this, I got to get with our tech team, but send us an email, and we'll email you the link, or it'll be posted on the internet. But jychambers@nsn.com, or call us at 727-329-0048. Or you can always contact us through our website, assetpreservationinstitute.org, and we'll get this out there so you can view it again, share it with your friends. We will hold another one in 2 weeks, some different topics. Please visit Kirk with a K, Elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's, KirkElliottPhD.com. Visit Stuart Rhodes at oathkeepers.org, and I guess that concludes our nationwide conference. I want to thank Dr. Elliott, Stuart Rhodes, and Larry Schooler, and all of you for taking your time. Stay smart, move swift, stay connected, and God bless. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
You get the recording of this. Where are you going to put that online?
I don't know. Perhaps Larry might know. We spoke with our IT guy in Seattle. It's the first one we've recorded on this platform, so we know it's recorded, and he can put it into a couple of different formats, so we might just be able to link it and post it, on all of our sites and put it up on YouTube. I'm hoping that that's the way we're able to do it.
Yes, Stuart, this is Larry. I'll work with Jeremy, and we'll figure it out. He's thinking may just post it and give you a link that you can send out that links either into our site or links to a common site. He's got to work out the details. He's got to capture it off of here and put it on to a platform he can maneuver around.